It is obviously very sad for me to feel moved to do this, but I'm going to comment on the substance of the debate and presentation a way ago, back in 2005, between Christopher Hitchens and George Galloway. But first, I want to explain why it is so sad for me. Usually, a 64-year-old deaf poet being pushed by police action into conditions that are unsavory. In my case, Parkinson's disease and poverty, to name a few of the remorseless actions, consequences towards me. To be kept out of the public view, to be eased into circumstances that are more amenable to privacy and humility. But it has long been the goal of Yoko Ono and Robert Fripp to use me as a spectacle of humiliation. And they planned this back in the 1970s. We know that because of their alliance. Their alliance were bands like calling themselves things like the Shunts, knowing they had an implant from Wattenmaker, a neurological implant of the sort, a nerve agent on a deaf early teenager who didn't know that it was in there. They sent in a Trump hottie to detonate it. They came in like a submerged, a human mind bomb and blew it up. They called themselves things like SPAS. So we know the horrible crime that is being committed by calling me up and asking that I be moved to suggest my views. Another thing, we know that there's a line in the sand between me and all concerned in media, who are the Sandbagger Alliance, who have ignored my intelligence about Diamanda Gullis and her role in 911, signifying what it really means, all the same. Because we're limited to the Sandbagger quote-unquote narratives, I'd like to show how the narratives that hotwire around the real issue of 911, hotwire around the real issue of the nerve agent that was used on me, hotwire around the tragic spectacle of humiliation that Yoko Ono and Robert Fripp have long planned, as represented between George Galloway and Christopher Hitchens. And I will now make that comment. I met a man named Derek Parfit at a School of Logical Positivism in Pittsburgh and had a conversation with him about what he called consequentialism. He was the author of a famous assessment in philosophy, the repugnant conclusion. The repugnant conclusion is basically a graph of stick figures. Here's wealthy people and here's poor people. If you try to redistribute the wealth, it'll just create a constant line of poor people. It's Thomas Malthus in essence. The repugnant conclusion was hailed by the University of Pittsburgh. I'm just Jimmy Curry. I was washing dishes for a living and deaf. To me, it seemed reasonable and logical that the repugnant conclusion would lead to a repugnant solution. It was an argument for genocide and saying that the alternative to genocide is fruitless feudal class war. And as a consequentialist, you would have to look at what George Galloway and Christopher Hitchens represented as their views through the lens of the outcome in Gaza, because Gaza was the poorest of the poor, but they just wanted to be left alone. They just wanted to have their lives. They wanted to rise slowly. They were the line that Parfit considered to be so contemptible. The poorest of the poor are now a society with the largest number of childhood amputees in the world. Many of those children, beyond tragically, if they survived from amputations without anesthesia. It doesn't take a genius to see that George Galloway was right in his assessment. Christopher Hitchens definitely represents himself as understanding that there were, for example, an Egyptian leader named Abraham who was in the prison system for his populism in Egypt against Mubarak. Somehow Hitchens doesn't connect the dots in saying that the closest continua of Arab Spring were the people who were at the highest risk of tragedy and extermination in the war on Iraq by lunkheads like Rumsfeld and Bush and Cheney. And the outcome in Gaza proves that all the more. He makes a stand in saying that Kurdistan, the Kurds, were noble, stateless heroes of change in Iraq and the Middle East. I've never heard that the extermination of Iraq and Afghanistan was of benefit to them. Certainly, there's nothing to suggest benevolence towards Kurdistan in the immiseration of Gaza. So you have to see the support for the Bush destruction of Iraq as infuriating disingenuity, because surely nobody believes that the Biden Nasrallah partnership meant well by the people of Kurdistan. They couldn't make up their minds what they wanted to do in Afghanistan. And somehow Hitchens got a little bit of a hold on the fact that Muslims were living in tragedy because of U.S. and British foreign policy. The hatreds of Muslims. Muslims were being turned on each other, and dictatorships were being sponsored who immiserated their own people. Galloway says the answer to this is to respect and understand and appreciate Muslim people and applaud their independence movements and ease the way for them through careful diplomatic engagement, scholarly exchange, and friendly appreciation of their human condition.